So, ladies and gentlemen, so I will say to you, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes this morning. One, I again wish Rochelle and Jacob Yashikov and their beautiful participation. We look forward to celebrating with your entire family in the very near future. We wish you a mazel tov. But, I'm somewhat conflicted in the sense that there's so much to say, obviously, about what is going on presently in Israel. And I also don't want to use necessarily the pulpit as a platform for my own personal opinion, unless I believe that from a religious context they need to be shared. So I put that just, if you will, as a preamble, and then also to think about the fact that our purpose in the context of a sanctuary should be in part to step away from the craziness of the oilam in which we live and to allow Torah on a weekly basis to be our guiding light. Now, obviously, there are times when we may have to veer more in one direction than the other. And certainly, I do believe that in part, it is my responsibility to share with you some of the situation that's going on. Yes, I know you are all well read. Yes, I know you all can watch CNN. I know you can all follow TikTok, whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, I just wanted to share a quick thought, and that is from a colleague of mine. She is what is she called? She's a spiritual guru, some type of reverend, interdenominational type of thing. It's great. God bless her. And she herself is a therapist and just had a conference with a number of other therapists, etc. I think there were about 50 of them. And she was speaking about value of relationships and what it takes to make relationships whole and to make relationships honest. And certainly we can find some of that throughout the Torah, especially in Sefer Bereshit, when we're talking about human beings, we're talking about building relationships, whether it's between spouses who can't have children, right? One of the themes of Bereshit, or if we're talking about the passing down of the tradition, or if we're talking about a favored son versus a less favored son, etc. So certainly there's place within the text to talk about that, but also I believe that the idea that Honey Getter shares is that for a relationship to be whole, and this is part of what we're experiencing as an American Jewish community, that sometimes it requires us to pause and have what are referred to as messy conversations. And that is to say that I'm going to stand at odds with somebody else with whom I do not agree. And I have essentially two choices, right? So choice number one is not to engage with such a person because, as has been posted on many social media sites, and my daughter is a proponent of this platform, of a pro-Israel platform, and she prefaces many of her remarks that are sent out to over 10,000 people. She says the following. She says, I know I'm not here to change anybody's mind, because I certainly won't be able to change any mind. And I think by and large that is true. Nonetheless, there are messy conversations that need to be had, both at home, here in the United States, and abroad. The messy conversation that needs to take place in Israel, and that is going to take place in Israel, because Israel is already in the midst of planning what it calls the day after strategy. The day after strategy is what exactly is going to happen in Gaza once the war is won. Now, make no mistake about it, the war will be won. The war will be won. The saying of the soldiers in the IDF today is the following. It says, Yachad nenatseach. Together we will win. Every person who I speak to in Israel has the most absolute resolve that there is no choice but to root out, eradicate every drop of evil that Hamas represents as an entity. Unfortunately, many people in the streets here in educated America that don't understand that we should not support terrorism, we should not support genocide, we should not support ethnic cleansing, we should not support the idea that women have no rights, that people of a sexual orientation have no rights, that free speech has no place in society, etc. Many people in America don't get that. God bless them all. The messy conversation that's going to take place in Israel, though, shortly, God willing, very shortly, should have, God willing, the hostages should be returned, etc., is the following. You are aware that there is an incursion into Gaza, and essentially northern Gaza is being wiped out. The only reason that the people are able to go from northern Gaza to southern Gaza is because Israeli tanks are literally accompanying them along that one street that takes you from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, because if the residents did that inside of Hamas, Hamas would do what? They would shoot them. They don't allow them to escape. Hence, the humanitarian crisis we know and we hear these terms, right, is not the fault of Israel. Absolutely isn't. Hamas is sitting on 200,000 gallons of fuel, which they continue to use not to provide for their people, but rather to operate the air filtration systems that are part of the underground tunnel system. That's a fact, right? So the messy conversation to have with people who are either here locally or conversations that will happen in Israel is what exactly is going to happen with Gaza. Gaza is destroyed. That's a fact. Gaza is destroyed, not Israel's fault in any way, shape, or form. Various options. 3 options that are being spoken about presently that are part of a discussion that our Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has proposed is the following. Option number 1 is this idea that Hamas will be emasculated from a military perspective, but it will be entitled to the right to continue administrative governance of Gaza. Now, for many, this is not a legitimate option because we know what they will do with that downtime, right? Option number 2 is the following. Option number 2 is that Israel goes in and administers the area, and trust me, the Israelis do not want to. The Israelis have no interest in doing so, and they will only do so in the presence of a United Nations peacekeeping force that will actually control the borders while Israel controls its own security. It's possible. And option number 3, again, not a good possibility, not a great option, excuse me, is that this area will become now under the governance of the Palestinian Authority. The problem with that, right, because you basically have 2 choices in Israel, it's either Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. The problem with the Palestinian Authority is they are as corrupt as is Hamas. And in fact, if you wanted to look up the net wealth of the leaders of Hamas and the leaders of Palestinian Authority, you will find that those numbers are way larger than any American actor or singer. It's just a fact. Okay? So the Palestinian Authority, which potentially could be offered the opportunity, right, to govern this area, hopefully the people would listen to the Palestinian Authority, et cetera, in theory, it would be great, except for the Palestinians themselves, it would still be a problem. It will be a problem because that group that's being brought in is going to be brought in by virtue of the request of Medina Israel, of the Israeli government. Everybody is in a no-win situation presently. It's not a good situation, but what we do know is the following. We do know that the Israeli army continues to function based on understanding the idea of human dignity of a civilian population. I can tell you firsthand from a conversation that I had with a friend of mine earlier this week. I've been trying to get in touch with him about 3 weeks, and I haven't been able to get in touch with him. It so happened that he sent me a text that he'd be able to speak to me whatever day it was this week. If you're like me and you're following these things, the days of the week are, forget about it, right? I have no idea. It's surprising that I showed up today. So in any event, so I happened to be able to speak to my friend Tuvia at 5:30 a.m. Some of you remember meeting Tuvia online when we were doing a series of adult education programs regarding the political situation in Israel. He made a presentation for us. He's very knowledgeable in this area. And I was able to catch up with Tuvia as I'm listening to a lot of racket in the background on the cell phone. Explains to me that today's his first day off, that he's been in service for the IDF for the last month, literally. And what's strange about that is Tuvia is in his mid-50s, and that's not typically the age to serve in the army, but he is a medic. And as a medic, his entire unit got called, regardless of what age they were, to help. Tuvia, how is it going? As I'm listening to bombs being fired at Israel in the background. And he is in the south of Israel, and he explains to me plain and simple that they're exhausted. Why are they exhausted? Because each and every day he and his unit are infiltrating into Gaza. They're trying to recover injured soldiers from Israel. They take them, they do the triage, what they have to do, and they take them back to southern Israel. They put the person down, they go back in. And they do this all day long, every day. And if it should so happen that they come upon a Palestinian civilian who is injured, they take care of that person too, period, end of story. Right? That's just the way it is. It's sort of ironic, we like to use the term here in our psychological parlance of the day of what do you people call it? PTSD, is that right? Post-traumatic stress, right? So Israel is living through that right now, but it's not post-traumatic. It's traumatic in the moment, right? The fact that these folks are able to responsibly take care of their civilians as best they can, the fact that they're able to strategize how to extract themselves from Gaza, we know that none of the Arab countries whatsoever will accept one Palestinian refugee. Ironically, this week at the school in which I teach in Westchester, New York, we welcomed 3 families from Israel who similarly have been displaced from their homes. Right? That's done in the Jewish world. Right? We have to be, and we are being, and don't let yourself be fooled, we are being an Or LaGoyim. We are being a light unto the nations. And we are doing that by acting in accordance with Torah values, which always drives how Israel handles its military affairs, always has been. I think today not only of my friend Tuvia, who's in southern Israel right now, and probably as we speak is in Gaza and might even be in one of those tunnels. I think of my neighbor, one of my high school graduates, who's 20 years old, who is serving in the military. She's on the northern border facing firing from Hezbollah. I think of other students, Liam, Oz, Brian, Danny, Yael, just to mention a few, all of whom I know and all that I'm in contact with. I want to say that we have to always, and for sure now, and it's going to be a little while, we have to stand strong with Israel, which brings us to Tuesday. Tuesday, there is a national rally in Washington, D.C. I happen to believe, as I try to explain it to the younger generation, if you wish, that this is important. I happen to believe it is a generational ask. You're not going to be asked to go to Washington, D.C. 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, or 7 years from now. This happens once a generation. And this is our time as Jewish people to show up. Many of you may have done it. I don't know if you recall or not. I'm older than you kids. But you may recall that we had to do it for Russian Jewry, right? When we were all trying to get the Russians out, the Jews out of Russia, there was a rally, right? But this is a generational ask, right? So I know from our group at my school, we're taking over 500 people with us to show up. They are anticipating a crowd of north of 250,000 Jewish people and Jewish supporters to showing up. And I will tell you, good for us. Good for us. And if we have to enter into the messy conversations with our neighbors, with people down the street, with Jewish people, with non-Jewish people, with pro-Palestinians, with left-wing liberals, whatever the case may be, we must enter those conversations. We must explain. I hope you had the opportunity to read my article that I published on Friday, which talks about the 100-year history that's documented by Zev Jabotinsky in his early efforts to make peace with the Arabs, in which he finally concluded that you cannot do so. He concluded that you can't do so because they don't accept any Jewish presence. Any Jewish presence. And that's what, by the way, friends, from the river to the sea exactly means. That's what it means. And that's a messy conversation to have with people. Yes, live and live, let live, as my grandmother always taught me. But Tuesday is our day to show up. Shabbat, as our community, is a day to show up, so that we continue to be an or lagoyim, so that we can continue to be a light amongst the nations, and hopefully a light unto one another. We just made the bracha for the month of Kislev, where we welcome in Chanukah. So let us pray that with the return of these hostages that you see before me, that with an establishment of peace in Gaza, and within our strength of community, that we can bring a sense of awe, a sense of light into the world, and a sense of simcha to those who are suffering. Shabbat Shalom.